All right, folks, it's officially day 27 of 31 Days of Horror slash 31 Days of Halloween, which means we are just a few days away from Halloween actually being here and this entire month being over and done with. So we're still in the late 2000s, actually it's from 2009. And much like Halloween, which we talked about yesterday, this film is also a remake of a beloved 1970s horror staple. In this case, it is The Last House on the Left. Now, in the pantheon of horror films, very, very few have been as significant and influential as Last House on the Left. This film came out in 1971, and really it was one of the more instrumental films, I think, in pushing horror away from being in the realm of the supernatural and the demonic and the haunted house stuff, and into the more realistic true crime sort of approach. Some people say it's a proto slasher film. I think it's something a little bit different. You know, it's not quite a rape revenge film, but it has elements of all these subgenres. And I did say subgenre. You can do the two subgenres uh, to describe the film that have been kind of carried over into a lot of subsequent movies. Now, Last House on the Left by Wes Craven is one of those films where when you watch it, you kind of realize it's not a great film, like structurally, like in terms of acting or even general scripting, but just the sheer visceral impact of the movie. It's hard to deny that it's one of the most memorable horror films ever made. And I think probably the best way to describe just how much visceral impact the film has, people tend to forget The Last House on the Left is actually a remake of Ingmar Bergman's The Virgin Spring. So nobody ever brings that up. It's a total and complete, rip-off, or I mean, homage to an Ingmar Bergman movie. It exists as its own property. It's that memorable. It's that effective. It's that groundbreaking. It's that pioneering. It may not be technically a great film, but it's certainly, or even an enjoyable film considering the content, but it's certainly a film that haunts you and stays with you. And it did a whole lot to kind of bring the horror genre into sort of a darker, more realistic territory. So I bring all that up to say the 2009 remake is really, really bad and totally needless. It does nothing to add to the story. I'm not going to say it's the worst horror sequel I've seen because you still have stuff like, the Evil Dead remake and the Elm Street remake and Halloween 2 by Rob Zombie, which I think are far, far worse than this one. But just on the whole, I'm not really sure what the director of the movie is trying to do other than cash in on a somewhat popular existing brand name. Uh, More or less, it's the same plot of the original, where we have these two young women. They're hanging out, and well, actually, it's not the exact same plot. Now that I think about it, because in the original is a bunch of teenage girls go to the inner city. They try to buy drugs for a concert, and then they get kidnapped. Well, this one, they don't even go to the city. They just hang out like a scummy motel, and they smoke marijuana with this really suspect guy. And when I say smoke marijuana, it's weird because like the little stunt joints they use are like the size of paper towel rolls. It's like King Kong marijuana for whatever reason. But yeah, they're hanging out, toking out, just doing really dumb teenage stuff. Oh, but wait a minute, the boy, he's actually a part of like some crazy, like criminal family gang. And of course, the two teenage girls get abducted. Then bad things happen. If you're familiar with the original, you know what's coming up. As far as the graphicness of the film, yeah, I mean it's pretty, nasty and grotesque. But as far as like maybe something like Irreversible or even I Spit on Your Grave from 1978, it doesn't hold a candle. It's nowhere near as shocking or visceral or as upsetting. It's still bad. Still not a fun thing to watch, but just putting it, in perspective with some of the genre contemporaries. And then the film, as we all know, takes one of the biggest suspension of disbelief ever in the history of the genre, to where not only do the escaped criminals uh, flee and get away with murdering these people, when they crash, where do they end up? What do you know? As fate would have it, it's the parents' house of one of the girls they murdered. So you've got to really, really, really suspend your disbelief for this movie to work. But the thing is, unlike The Virgin Spring by Bergman, or even the original Wes Craven directed Last House on the Left, you don't really feel that sort of transition with the parents to where they slowly realize, oh, these guys killed our daughter, time to get revenge. You don't see that gradual transition. So instead of it being a film where, like in the original, where you slowly see them go from, okay, it's time to get bloody revenge. In this movie, it's just like they're normal, 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 and then they start killing people. They start choking dudes and drowning them in dirty dishwasher, and you're just like, what? It just kind of happened out of nowhere. I mean, I know they're upset, but you don't have that glue. You don't have that central part like in the original film, or even in Virgin Spring, where you realize the parents make that cogent, conscious decision to get violent homicidal revenge. You don't have that part in this movie, and that's a huge, huge mistake that really kind of takes a lot of steam out of the final act. And lastly, this film has one of the absolute worst endings ever in the history of horror films. I've seen some dumb endings, but the ending in this one, good lord, I can't even, like, if you think the whole idea of these people raping and murdering the girls, just as fate would have it, crashing at the home of one of their parents takes a lot of suspension of disbelief. The final scene of this movie, the final kill, you'll be like, no, this is just ridiculous. Not gonna give it away, but it's just beyond stupid. So yeah, all in all, it's not a really worth seeing at all. It's just very by the numbers, completely pointless. It does nothing to add to what the original Last House on the Left did. It's just a really, really predictable, formulaic, boring movie, and you can do better. So I'm gonna give this one uh, 1.5 Ghost Reese's Cups out of 4. So it's not really worth seeing whatsoever. That said, tomorrow we're actually getting into the 2010s with a film which really, really tried hard to become a social phenomenon, but didn't. Is it worth going out of your way to see? I'll tell you then. So tune in. We're almost done. Halloween's coming, folks.